Hello everyone, my name is Lyndall Manson and I'm the Director of Governance, Policy and Projects at TAFE Directors Australia. I would like to welcome you all to today's TAFE Talk session on the impact of artificial intelligence on TAFE compliance and operations. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we are meeting right across Australia. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and to any First Nations peoples who are joining us today. If you would like to introduce yourself and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that you are currently on, please feel free to do so in the chat. So, generative artificial intelligence, or Gen AI. Everyone is talking about its use and impact, and it's the hot topic for today's TAFE Talks. However, a lot of the discussion to date among education providers has been around the ways in which Gen AI is impacting and disrupting teaching, learning, and assessment in education. But today we are going to look at it from a different perspective and focus more on how this technology will impact TAFE compliance, operations, and administration. And judging from the number of registrations that we've had for this session today, it's obviously a topic of keen interest for our TDA members. We are absolutely delighted to be joined today by Chris Smith, who is the Head of Strategy and Innovation at ReadyTech, one of TDA's valued corporate affiliates. Chris is ReadyTech's resident education technology futurist, acting as a change maker for both the Australian education sector and ReadyTech's teams alike with his advocacy for future readiness through technology. Chris is a thought leader and influencer in education and a mentor within Australia's startup edtech ecosystem, and we are extremely grateful to him for sharing his time and expertise today. I would also like to introduce Marin Radabulyats, who is the Academic Registrar at Melbourne Polytechnic. Marin has worked in the Academic Registry Department at Melbourne Polytechnic since 2008. We are also joined by Peter Smith, who has been the Academic Registrar at Chisholm Institute since 2015, and prior to that was at Bendigo Kangan Institute for 15 years, with 3.5 of those years as the Academic Registrar. Welcome, Marin and Peter. Before I hand over to Chris, I wanted to let everyone know that today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to everyone who registered for this TAFE Talks session and on the TDA website. Closed captioning is also available for this event. If you have any questions that you would like to pose to our speakers today throughout the session, please use the Q&A box and we will come back to those at the end. It now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Chris Smith from ReadyTech to kick off today's discussion. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Lyndall. Really excited about the session today, so thanks everyone for joining. I should also share that I'm on Gadigal land today and I'm very grateful to be here. Indulge me, let me quickly introduce the session and explain why I believe it's really important. I think it's sort of well understood that Gen AI can radically change the way that we work, and I think that TAFE is absolutely no exception to that. And I think, as Lyndall touched on, we've sort of focused a lot today about that teaching, learning and assessment. I think they're hugely important, but I really want to lean into the other side of things and look at operations, compliance, noting that by putting both AI and compliance in the title, it probably doubled the registrations that we likely had today, and maybe drew in some people from departments and regulators. And let me assure you that that was entirely deliberate. I think one of the key advantages that Gen AI has is this ability to support administrative tasks and improve productivity as a whole. And I think it lends itself to a whole range of opportunities where humans are really stretched right now. And I think maybe impacting our ability to deliver the sort of service to students and the community that we'd really like to. And I'd be really surprised if that didn't sort of resonate with the audience. So we want to sort of step through or talk through some of those opportunities today and explore how ready and willing we are to embrace this technology. I think for context, and Palak, if you could just share that slide, that'd be awesome. I'll just share these insights from our recent Voice of Vet survey, and it just highlights a couple of things. First of all, that compliance is one of the areas where we might further digitize, and that's the one on the left. And then also on the right, we've got this idea that only 1 in 5 actually have AI currently incorporated into their digital strategies. Now, many of the respondents here were in that SME or private RTO space, but I think given that TAFE's work to these long-term strategic plans, if those plans were written more than 18 months ago, there's a good chance that AI isn't referenced at all. And I think it's a problem that we actually need to address. So I think that the next point, and Palak, you can stop sharing that now. I think the next point I want to make is about our panelists. So whatever we think about AI, I think it's hard to deny the profound sort of disruption that it potentially represents. And I think change inside complex organizations like TAFE is actually really challenging, as I'm sure everyone here would agree. What I sort of see is that you typically have leaders in these organizations, mostly executives and boards, and they're obliged to sort of chart the course for that change. And then you've got new people coming into the organization, and they basically do what they're told. And then there's everybody else. And that's, I think, where the majority of people sit in terms of headcount. They know systems, they know processes, and they are, unfortunately, typically the most resistant to change because, I guess, time. So they're sort of affectionately known in technology circles as the frozen middle. And I think for me, this perspective has been really underrepresented in the AI discussion today, despite the fact that the change is likely going to disproportionately impact those people and even threaten them. So for me, having Peter and Marion come on today, it's really to help talk to that specific experience from the front lines. And I think the idea really is that we get to hear what they're thinking, but really importantly also what they're feeling. So let's bring them in and say hello. So good afternoon, Peter. Good afternoon, Marion.
Good afternoon, Chris, and the audience.
Good afternoon, Chris and everyone. Thank you for the invite.
You're very welcome. I don't know if you were invited or co-opted onto this, but thanks, Marion.
Same thing.
Now, before we start, I should also point out that we've set up this conversationalist with our panelists today to give them license to talk hypothetically. And that's a really important point to note, as in what they contribute today shouldn't be confused for the AI strategies of their respective institutes. So I ask everyone in the audience to afford them that opportunity, please. And now we can get into it. I think I really wanted to start by baselining things. So I'm just going to start with a really simple question, which is on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate your level of expertise in AI? And we'll start with you, Peter. And Palak, in the background, would you mind standing up the poll? Because I think this is something that would be great to get from the audience as well.
For me, going back to when I was first invited to participate in this panel, I would have put myself as a number 1, as an observer. Since then, I've started to do a bit of playing, somewhere between probably 1.5 and 2.
1.5 and 2, okay. And Marion, how about you?
Same. I'll put myself down as an explorer / enthusiast.
Okay.
You become an enthusiast, I've found by necessity almost, and so that's where I'm sitting at the moment.
Yeah, awesome. We might run that poll for like a few more minutes, Palak, if that's okay, and I'll ask you to close it in a sec. Look, I think there's a couple of things just from this that I really want to touch on. It's fair to say that neither Peter nor Marion have identified as experts in AI, and I think that's sort of the point. And the other thing is, if there's one takeaway from today's session that I'd really like to encourage everyone to think about, it's to figure out how they might level up just 1 on that scale. So this idea that we're on this journey, and as we move through observer to explorer and on and up, I doubt there's visionaries in the audience, unless, I don't know, Sam Altman's joined us accidentally. It's fair to say that we can kind of just aim for between that sort of 2, 3, 4. So back to the panel. So you said that you kind of started to explore. So are you using tools like ChatGPT or Gemini? Like, what's your initial thoughts of those? And I might start with you, Marion.
Look, like I said, I'm exploring mainly and experimenting with some of the tools. probably more leaning towards Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, because I have access to that more readily. And the tools that we're looking at, or I'm looking at and experimenting with, not the licensed tools. I'm using the basic free components of it, and still being able to get a good insight into some of the capabilities.
Yeah, awesome. And you, Peter?
So I've had a little bit of a play in, I suppose, the one that everybody seems to be talking about, ChatGPT, and trying to get it to sort of give me some ideas of, plugging in there about projects and the implementation. And I've been fascinated by, I suppose, the speed of the response, I suppose the grammar, the syntax, all those sorts of things. On the flip side, you do get concerns that, okay, how valid is that information you're receiving? So that goes back to, I suppose, the library where the AI agent is drawing its information from. But it's been fascinating so far, and I want to play some more.
That's fair. I think there's an amazing conversation I had with Peter really early on as we were preparing for this, and I asked him if he'd been playing, and he said he had. And to quote, the outputs were insane. So hopefully we've into a place where we can fine tune and get better outputs than insanity. Look, I think the next thing, just to round out this sort of baselining, in terms of the impact on your roles and the roles around you, the teams around you, like, do you have a really good understanding of that right now, or is that still a little bit up in the air? And maybe to you, Maren.
Well, it's gathering that understanding. I feel the impact is inevitable. What I'm understanding with respect to the AI component is that we live in that compliance world, and the impact on our role is that we will need to start to do things a little bit differently. As the registrar, one of our major responsibilities or accountabilities is to ensure compliance and get information distributed out to the organisation, the key stakeholders about compliance, the regulators, auditing requirements, the contract, the changes in the contract, etc. And that can become a challenge. That process is taking information, it's evaluating the information, it's taking summaries and seeing how it applies to our business process and business rules and policies. And also we've got frontline people who take that information and are informed with this information to try and provide a service to our students and provide a good experience to our students. So I feel the impact of AI in my role will be to be able to harness this information and produce a connection of that information to our key stakeholders externally, being our students, and internally being our staff members and program areas and quality units and so on. So I feel the impact will be that we'll be approaching this communication and the gathering and harnessing of this information and implementing our requirements in a different way. And hopefully it'll become a little bit more efficient. And I guess that'll come out in the conversations today.
Yeah, sure. I think it's the distribution of knowledge across a complex organisation is a challenge, and significantly more so in something like vocational education.
And with it comes that ultimately it comes that better experience, we hope, at the end of the day. And it does align with digital strategy and I guess our Melbourne Polytechnic's corporate strategy as well.
Yeah, sure. Peter, does that sort of reflect where you're at?
And I certainly don't want to repeat what Maren's just said. And I suppose for my role, which is probably slightly different to what Maren's is, I essentially deal with internal customers in terms of providing good guidance and advice and interpretation of the various regulations, legislation, and our contractual obligations. In terms of changes to the role, I can see AI, once you plug all that information, which you can gather basically from all around the world, plug it into an AI agent, and you could simply ask it a question. It'll find the response for you. It certainly, in that sense, it'll save my time. But what it does, it changes my role to not one of sourcing and providing the information and the interpretation, but to validating what's been produced. Because like everything, garbage in, garbage out, if the right things aren't there or things are missing in terms of the library, it's sourcing, it needs, I suppose, the human on the end in my case, the registrar to provide that validation as in relation to the information, but also the interpretation of the information.
Yeah, I think that validation is really interesting. We'll get on to sort of trust in a little while. Look, I think we need to move on and get a bit more specific about AI and compliance and operations. So let's discuss some possible use cases and where it might come in. I think this list isn't exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination. We simply cherry pick some examples of what might be on the near horizon. There are edtech companies out there and consultancies and whatever else, and they are working on developing with this technology and with these tools to offer the sorts of value that we're about to describe. So just moving on, I think let's start with something really basic. So Gen AI is especially good at summarization and generation of content. And I think that's what we're seeing on the teaching learning side. So let me throw a couple of examples your way, guys. So first up, let's just say a student calls or comes to front desk, and wouldn't it be amazing if there was just an option, a button, a prompt on the system that you're using that basically said, summarize this student for me. And effectively that goes away and reads everything that's related to that student profile. It provides an instant summary for the frontline staff. So instead of sort of having to jump into multiple systems or read multiple pages or pull together information about fees and progress and attendance, this single click just brings that all to the surface view. I mean, it sounds good to me. Is that something that you think could be of use in your institutes? Maybe to you, Peter.
Certainly in our current CRM, when a customer does call in, and if they're a repeat customer, it has the ability to recognise, I suppose, the phone number and will bring up their record. So at least you have that there. But as you mentioned, in that you have to jump around to get a sense of what the student has been doing and what the student has been inquiring about and what potentially they have been applying for in the past. The potential with AI is to harness that and provide you with a very simple picture of that student without having to sort of move around the systems to try and identify it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Marion, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think having that information at the fingertips of the inquiry is very important, or at the inquiry. I feel it also could aid in identifying what information regarding that student profile is relevant and or appropriate to disclose to the student and to other parties during that inquiry. And I think also it will enable that front-end person to, prompt questions of AI as well. So if a student brings a question out and they're not quite sure what a census date is or what, a fee statement might mean and so on, they can bring that information up, I guess, on the fly and actually have relevant information to give them without having to, pass it on to someone else.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think what we're seeing from the implementation of this sort of style of technology is reduced staff stress levels, where it's actually just much easier to use. It's faster to access the information, which means that the service levels improve. So I think that's a fair use case. Extending it out. So in terms of the inbound inquiries and things like that, where you might get questions on application, enrollment fees, eligibility, another sort of use case that AI is really good at is drafting written responses or emails. And I think, these could be sent either sort of automatically or queued for review by the human in the loop, as Pete was describing, and distributed once validated. And again, it's another of those that potentially saves time. I think, Marion, you and I had a conversation about how that's handled right now through templating and whatever else, but maybe you want to expand on that for the audience.
Yeah, look, I definitely agree with the queuing to the loop and verifying. I think at some point we need to understand what information is being sent out to the student and ensuring that it's correct. But we try and customise our communications across the board with students. And in doing that, we are creating instances of emails and or communications linked to templates in a SMS, and they're selected and then sent out, or automated and sent out. And that is a constant constant maintenance challenge. So you're constantly going in and maintaining information that could potentially get out of control and or provide challenges to ensure the accuracy of it. So with the tool that could help to formulate and or record and then manage, I think that could be quite a benefit for us. And it explores and opens up that new world, doesn't it? So at the moment we document and we have all this information, but we might be able to do that more efficiently, with the aid of the tool in GAI.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think you call that one of the pain points as someone who works to build SMS, like the template management is especially challenging, and the sheer number of templates that are maintained is actually a pretty large complexity and time suck. So Peter, anything else that you might want to add to that?
Probably nothing else I need to add. We struggle the same as Maren with the number of templates which we have to maintain, and it's so easy for them to slip through the cracks. You could almost employ someone on a full-time basis just to maintain the myriad of templates. In a recent exercise for a particular cohort of I suppose sponsors or employers, it was identified there was another 40 email templates required on already the tens of email templates that are sitting there. With AI, it's got the potential to basically create a personalized, and personalization is really important to us, a personalized communication for the student based on them, and not what we've guessed is like a generic type template.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty significant opportunity. I want to move on. I think like unique to TAFE for me is its commitment to like servicing the whole community, and by that I mean that you deliver to multiple diverse cohorts across this huge range of qualifications, which is extremely admirable, and we thank you for that. But it also often translates to epic amounts of admin, and I think often there's still paper around or partially digitized processes. And I think one thing that AI can do is say read documents, convert to text, ultimately into data that's possible to store in systems. So for example, you can upload a document, it can consume written text and store that as data into a system, which is effectively data entry. So how do you feel about that idea that the AI could potentially replace some of that heavy lifting in terms of data entry? I'm going to ask a pretty leading question, which is, do you think your teams would appreciate a machine doing the data entry for them? Peter.
That's a bit of
yeah, it'd be hard to say no, right?
It would be. Okay, we're moved a long way from using paper. I mean, in terms of enrollment documentation, we haven't moved exclusively to online, I suppose, applications and enrollments. We still have some paper going around. And I know at particular times of the year, and anybody here involved in customer service at the front end of either a private provider or a large TAFE will know certain times of the year, you are basically buried with paperwork or the equivalent of that in online applications. Anything that would enable the paper and the data from that paper to get into a system where you could then validate it in that system would be I suppose, a godsend.
Sure. And Maren?
And I hope it extending that out not just to paper, but we capture a lot of information in spreadsheets, and we verify things in a spreadsheet, and then we would transpose that in a process where we would prepare different key stakeholders within the organisation for readiness for enrolment. So that can be quite complicated, and it does capture a lot of information, a lot of cross-checking of that information. So definitely a tool to transpose that information into something like a student management system, which could then be verified to prepare for an enrolment period. That would definitely help. So similarly to extracting or reading documents and extracting information, which is scraping, and it's quite common, scraping from spreadsheets and landing them in the relevant fields.
Yeah, I'm just noticing on chat, I think Peter makes a really good point on chat that actually data entry automation is actually usually more accurate because humans do have a tendency tendency for error, let's say. Not that either of your institutes would employ people who data entry.
That's right.
Good. Make that extremely clear on session. Look, I think let's lean tentatively into compliance for a minute. So look, I think worth sharing that at ReadyTech late last year we ran a hackathon, and the winning team their idea was how you could readily use AI to draft a training and assessment strategy. And it took previous examples, and I think where it worked best was where you might have a first version that you've used for a specific cohort or delivery or whatever else, and then as you need to create iterations of that for different delivery or cohorts, it could do that really well. And actually, it took virtually no time at all. And I think that's one of those ones, Peter, you were mentioning how there's these bottlenecks at certain times of the year, how this is one of those where you're developing all these training and assessment strategies for the year. So would that be the sort of thing that would be worth exploring?
Certainly with creating TASs, it does become at times a bottleneck, particularly as you're looking towards the preparation of the offerings for the subsequent year. Because of the volume you're dealing with, and certainly with TAFEs, it's quite a significant amount of different qualifications and cohorts that you're dealing with. Being able to build those, I suppose, not just quickly but effectively, is as you said, it's one of the bottlenecks, which sometimes actually slows the process, getting yourself ready to start receiving applications and enrolments for the next year. So anything that, again, relieves people of, I suppose, the tedium of duplicating TASs and designing for different cohorts, anything like that would be certainly welcomed.
Yeah, okay. Maren, anything that you'd like to add to that one?
Yeah, I agree, and I think the capacity or the capability could also extend out into, taking that, the TAS, just another document that can be incorporated into, analysing and combining information from different documents. So it could inform training plans, it could inform a student inquiry, it could help to build a profile, it could help to customise student training requirements if they have access to this information, rather than having to go off and explore and then get back to a student a couple of days later. And it also helps, potentially, if we've got that information to, and you have a student profile, is to look at the suitability of a program for a particular student. If we look at a program, we have all that information about what is going to be delivered and how it's going to be assessed, and we can give that information to a student. I think it's a prequel to, them getting a training plan and understanding it.
Yeah, I think all of those are really good examples of where sort of AI support or AI guidance is. I think, it's inevitable that those things are going to come in for things like career guidance, for things like unit selection that's geared towards career pathways, things like that. I think that's really good to call out. Thanks, Maren. Let's extend this out. And let's touch on the thorny subject of RPL as an example. So I think one of the things that we know is possible is to take employment history from, say, a resume, and we can analyze that. And I think that sort of when we consider that in context to optimizing for RPL, one of the working models that I've seen extracts that work experience and skills and then cross-references those against the criteria that's embedded in units of competency, and then it sort of summarizes where an individual might be in context to RPL. And I kind of get this is somewhat controversial, but we have like a skill shortage in some areas, and I think RPL is one of the possible solutions to that. And I sit on the Innovation Task Force for the Future Skills Organisation, one of the JSCs, and this subject came up at their national forum last week. And we need to increase throughput in certain things, and RPL is one of the things that I think is maybe a little bit underutilized. So I'm going to say, do you have a position on that, guys? And it's completely fine to say I'd like to stay away from this one, because I think there might be someone online who might be from a department or a regulator. So lean into it or choose to lean away. Your call, Peter.
RPL assessment. Bearing in mind, I suppose, the amount of effort involved, the expertise that's required of the assessor, the importance of the RPL assessment kits, and at times the lack of, I suppose, financial incentive to get involved with RPL, I might need to lean out of that one.
Yeah, fair, Peter. I don't want to put you in a compromised position. I think we agreed that. Maren?
Yeah, it's a complicated one. It's a complicated one. No, not really. It's a complicated one. And verification is really the key here, isn't it? It's being able to endorse and verify accurate information and evidence. And retaining, what's the go with the retaining of all the information as well, and where is it retained? So maybe AI still, it's developing very quickly. So retaining information once we're able to capture it, is something that could be better done. So yeah, it is a complicated one, and it does depend on future design of training packages and curriculum and everything else that's going to come with it. So I think RPL evolves as much as AI will, I think, moving forward, but it is a complicated one, but potentially.
Marion, I think you've just given us a soundbite of the day, which is RPL will evolve as much as AI. Like that, I mean, that in and of itself is worth joining the session today for. But I think let's move on to like one of the core use cases, and I think everyone's kind of already touched on this, which is this idea of co-pilots or agents, or I guess in old language like chatbots. But I think that the idea of capturing and distributing institutional knowledge is a really core value proposition here. This idea that TAFEs, by their nature, are sort of complex institutes, and they're operating in these complex, highly regulated spaces, and there's large headcounts in terms of those people who are asked to interact with that information, and it often, I assume, creates a bottleneck up to you guys. I think where we're at today, even if you just go onto the paid version of, say, ChatGPT using GPT-4, you can spin up an agent in 30 seconds. And I think I did it on the session with you guys the other day just to show. And you can embed like all of the documents that matter: ASCO, TEXA, eSource, CrySource, EventMIS, VSL, Taxi, even your own internal operating procedures, although I'd only recommend doing that in a private instance. And sort of train or embed those and then train this agent or co-pilot to be sort of fine-tuned against those things. And that then allows it to potentially almost replace some of that function for you. And in my head, I'm seeing it more like if I have a question on the front lines, I can ask and have it answered and then pass that answer up to be verified, as opposed to just passing the question up to you guys potentially. So it becomes a slightly like a deviation on that same process. So what do you reckon to that as a concept, Peter?
It's certainly, I suppose, time is a critical thing, particularly when you're sitting at the front counter or you're sitting in a call center answering a call. And sometimes I do get inquiries from people at the front of house, and those types of things sometimes take time to do sufficient research to be able to go back with advice and interpretation. Something like, I suppose, an internal chatbot, for want of a better term, would allow, I suppose, a quick response to be developed, and then it handed off for verification and then provided back to the customer. That's certainly got some advantages. One of the problems with AI in a TAFE sense, and probably equally with a private provider, is it requires a fair amount of investment of time, resources, and money. And it's not till we get to the point where we have to sort of step over the edge and actually embrace it and introduce it, we're going to see this happen, because we tend to be a bit standoffish at times when it comes to innovation of this type.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think part of this conversation today, and I'm just noting that Vanessa's making some points about this stuff's already in development in the chat, and completely. I think the risk here is that the technology edtech providers get ahead of the market in terms of like, these things are possible, they've been validated, the benefits are there. But in terms of where the TAFEs are at, or the private organizations are at, or actually more specifically the departments and the regulators, maybe they're not so far along on the journey that they can actually use these with tacit approval. So I think that's one of the challenges. Marion, anything you kind of want to add to that?
I guess I touched on that earlier, when we harness information and giving the right information to people who validated information that can use that in communications. But look, I think it's definitely worth exploring, because it's happening. Microsoft are encouraging people to have their private AI servers where they can control where you can control your data. I think we talk about compliance and regulators and contracts, and it sounds sometimes, we wished we lived in a more exciting world and it wasn't so compliant. But I think in this stage, in this instance, it probably works to our advantage, because we've got information that is not open to bias or I guess variables that are open to other parts of AI, because we've got data there that we can harness that is in a contract, it's in a standard, it's in legislation. It's almost, once we can verify that that's the correct data that was extracted, we potentially could be able to provide that useful information more broadly, very quickly. And I do agree that there is a setup.
Yeah, I think Rosemary makes a similar point about the interpretation of regulations and the fact that they're not overly prescriptive. Like that there is a role that the AI could play in that interpretation. Whether or not it kind of needs validation, I think, is something that we'll figure out on the fly. I think. Sorry, no, go on.
I just want to make one more point. I think we take for granted the information that comes back to us when we interrogate AI. And I think the challenge is that, understanding that there will be work involved in training people and understanding AI when they get the information that's presented to them. So that's an important piece of work as well, I feel, if we're going to go down that path.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I think the assumption here is that TAFEs, if they run these things themselves, will be running their own private instances. I think Margot makes that point that most of the enterprise offerings now would have that privacy as a core consideration. So just want to move on and just step slightly aside from Gen AI for a sec and just talk about machine learning and neural networks specifically, because I think they're actually excellent in predictive analytics. And I think we've seen this. I think I did a talk at TDA about some of the work we've done in predictive analytics in apprenticeships, and the fact that we can predict apprentice risk with a really high degree of accuracy based on data that's available. And I think of this in context of things like improving student support or support for students at risk, and the way that we might create these interventions, which could then trigger some of the things that we've been talking about from Gen AI. It could trigger these automated comms. It could trigger schedules to be set up automatically. But the initial sort of identification of those at risk is actually really interesting. And I just want to get your sense of that. And I think this one really probably touches on the bias as much as any of the other stuff as well. So Peter, Marion, maybe we'll start with you, Peter.
Yeah, that's over the years working in TAFEs, one of the things that's, I suppose, been important is identifying those who could be at risk of basically not completing or falling through the cracks. Our aim in life is, and certainly should be, helping people succeed. And if people are potentially at risk of not doing that for a variety of reasons, identifying them has, I suppose, traditionally been problematic and involves people's judgments based on their experiences. And some people are good at it, some people are not so good. But if you had some sort of, I suppose, reliable tool that, as you mentioned, it's quite good at predictive analysis, that would certainly, if it, I suppose, it takes out of the human range of having to go in, interrogate the data and make a judgment call if this person or that person is at risk of falling through the cracks.
Sure. And Marion, anything there?
Yeah, nothing really I can add. And I do know it's very much an important part of student service areas, and they're exploring options. And in the past, we as an organisation have tried to build that tool with the data that we had access to, and it's just very, very complicated. And being able to tap into something that could do it very quickly for us is definitely something. Not completely in my realm, but definitely something that the organisation will look at.
Yeah, I think we do it, and we're really mindful that you can't get that wrong because the stakes are so high. So it does take a lot of investment up front to train the model and test that the output is actually highly predictable. I think let's talk about trust, because I think this is, there's some stuff coming up in chat about some of the barriers, and I think, we should touch on those. just because something is possible doesn't always mean we should do it. So let's touch on some of those barriers that we might have discussed in sort of the challenges that we might have to implement these things. So you guys are sort of on the hook for this to some degree, and from a purely sort of surface level, how comfortable are you with this sort of new world that we've discussed? Peter?
I suppose in another life I was a bit of a Luddite. And so I'd be dragged kicking and screaming from the 19th into the 20th century. I suppose trust is the biggest thing. And for me, I have to, before I implement a system or involve the implementation of a system, such as AI, a new student management system, a new CRM, there's got to be that trust in both the technology, what's supporting that technology, but also the information that occupies that or goes in that technology. The old garbage in, garbage out type of thing. So it'll take time to build enough trust to rely on something approaching 100%.
So you're not necessarily seeing it as your path to retirement just yet, Peter?
No, I'm
Okay.
in here for a little while longer.
Okay, and Marion?
Yeah, like it's from our perspective, it's still very new. I would approach using AI officially, in certain aspects. With caution, you have to make sure you cross all the T's and dot the I's, but however, I feel that it's coming along so quickly, and it's inevitable that AI will be there, and I think the benefits are definitely significant enough for us to explore how we can use it. But am I comfortable with it as it is now? I think there's a lot of variables that are determining whether I can be comfortable or not. So to do our job properly, we've still got a lot of things that need to fall in place with about what we can use it for and how we can use it. But definitely we need to get we need to get on the game with respect to understanding how we can use it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. I think Margot, just in the chat, just made a really good point as well that extends on what you were saying, Marion, that everyone needs to learn how to sort of use this technology, students, but actually who's teaching the students? So we need to figure out a way. And I think this came up a lot in the National Forum at the Future Skills, and I know Ross made a comment earlier that I've lost. But this was one of the bigger challenges, like how do you teach mastery in something where the teachers might not necessarily have mastery themselves because it's just moving so fast? I think that's a core challenge. I think the other thing, just to sort of finish on, is this idea that the rapidly changing sort of space in terms of regulation with AI. I think there's a lot of I guess challenges there around governments and departments setting policy around this. And I think globally, everything's moving at different speeds. It's actually, there's a significant challenge there. And I'm sure that there's potentially departments on the call who are on their own journey. And I think that could inhibit or constrain adoption of some of this stuff because there's just uncertainty in the market around what will and won't be possible. Is that fair from what you guys see? Would you wait for approval before you sort of invested or adopted some of this stuff? Peter?
Yeah, I suppose it depends upon where I'm sitting and what I suppose the environment's like. There's nothing to stop me dabbling as an individual or department head in how that could assist my department. What I'm really excited about today for is we're getting the conversation started, and it's a conversation we really haven't looked at here at Chisholm, and the only conversation has been, as you mentioned at the start of this session, it's about the teaching and learning aspect of AI. So I'm certainly not averse to giving things a go and certainly validating what we come up with, but I think a serious conversation needs to be not just commenced as we're doing today, but certainly held, and both within our own institutes or whichever sort of training provider we are, or across the sector.
Yeah, And Marion, anything you want to add on that?
I certainly wouldn't be producing documents at audit that were verified by AI or produced solely by AI. So that's one thing. However, like I said, being able to harvest information about contracts and about students and about communications, definitely we need to start exploring that. Policy and regulators and that's a tough one. I know regulators at the moment are really tapping. I spoke to our privacy and data directorate about what's happening at Melbourne Policy, but they're being prompted to provide information about where AI is used, so they really understand where we're getting information from and what we're using it for. So it takes time to gather all that and structure policy, and if we wait for that for certain things, then we run the risk of falling a little bit behind of the benefits that we could gain from it.
Yeah, agree. And, it's a rapidly moving space. Look, I'm conscious of time, and I think it'd be good to just field a few questions. But I think the hope really is that we're sort of actively preparing for the changes of the sector. And I think that's sort of come to the surface here today. And I think that risk is real, that, the technology exists, the benefits are validated, but we're unable to implement based on our readiness or regulation or whatever it might be. And I think that's going to be a challenge. I just want to end by thanking you both, Peter and Marion, and extend that gratitude actually to both of your institutes, Chisholm and Melbourne Polytechnic, for supporting the session. I think it's really important to actually reflect that. I think it's, how do I say this politely? I don't think it's a small thing to agree to participate in front of your peers on a subject that you're on a mission claim to not be experts in. And I feel like that vulnerability is more than admirable. So I'm really, really grateful to you guys today. So thank you. And I think, just to sum up, I think when I reflect on the session from the original idea that we had to working with Peter and Marion over the last few weeks, what I see is the sort of power in admitting that you're not an expert, leaning into that curiosity, and then kind of working towards mastery. And I think that's really what we're aiming for as a sector. And I really hope that the audience took some value away from that today. And I just want to ask you guys one last question, because I did you a disservice earlier. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate your expertise in Australian vocational education? Peter? Don't be modest. Don't be modest.
I only rate myself as probably a 3 and a bit.
A 3 and a bit. Marion? 5.
I might ask my staff actually.
Oh, that would be a good one. Let's pull your staff.
Well, look, look. I've been in vet and TAFE for 30 years, and I can't say that I'm an expert. So and spent time in the classroom and in the academic registry and in different areas, but I constantly trying to learn and keep up with the sector. And this change is also going to challenge us a little bit, but I'd probably 3.5 to 4.
You're way too modest. Ask me. I'm a 5. But I think the point there is that there's this trust deficit that exists right now with the output from AI, and I think what we really need are domain experts who can verify what's coming out. And I think, if anything, it's actually our intelligence that matters most right now. And I think that the AI is really just there to make us better at what we do. So on that note, Lyndall, I'll hand back to you, and we might take some questions.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers today, to Chris, Peter and Marion. I think every time I sit in on a conversation about AI, you just realise that actually the possibilities of the use of AI are just limitless. And it's completely undisputed that AI can save us a lot of time and can do all of those mundane tasks. But the crucial issue, I think, which keeps coming back in all of the conversations about AI is the issue of validation. And that came up when we started talking about RPL, and I saw some comments in the chat about that. There's been some really interesting comments and questions coming through. One of the really big questions which was posed towards the beginning of the discussion from Sam Nyasani. I'll read it out. Knowing how slowly compliance and contractual requirements respond to technological developments, my question to Peter and Maren is, how do you walk that fine line between harnessing the potential Gen AI presents to augment, enhance, or support compliance and operations on the one hand, and on the other, still meeting your compliance and contractual obligations? And in essence, that was what the entire presentation was about today. How do we walk that fine line? So there's that. And then on the other hand, there's been a few questions around, you put the call out at the beginning, Chris, about it would be great if we could all just think about how do we move up, that one level in our skill with AI. And, there's questions around how do we train our staff. And another question from a fellow Lyndall was, how do you set AI up for a large public organisation, that maintains the data integrity, reduces risk of unauthorised access and that sort of thing? It's there's that question of, it's so big, and where to begin? What are the concrete steps? I mean, just having the conversation is a first step, but where to from there? So I'll throw that open, Chris. I don't know if you want to have a go first and then let Peter and Maren respond.
Linda, that would be awfully kind of you to come to me first, but I think I'll defer to my esteemed colleagues. Maybe Peter, if you want to pick that up.
Say that was a huge question. It's a bit of an understatement.
It was.
And again, it's one of the sort of questions you're going to have to, I suppose, mull over, stew over.
Yes.
Because the last thing you want to do is do anything that's a knee jerk, or jump too quickly because everybody else is jumping. I suppose Maren's a bit the same as myself. We tend to be cautious, not overly, mostly, I suppose, risk averse, because it's part of our roles to make sure we don't go to jail, or make sure as many of our staff don't go to jail as possible. So yeah, I'd have to take something like that on notice.
Yeah, look, it's a big question, and I think that's a starting point. We may have touched on it today. It needs to be embedded in your strategic plan and your digital strategy. I think that's a starting point, and from there you can frame it, you can massage it, you can work with it, you can evolve over time. I think sometimes with strategies they can be a little bit medium to long term. So I think we need a category within our strategic direction and strategies and digital strategies that are a little bit more nimble and quick, which will incorporate something along the lines of working at how we work with AI. So I think that's a good starting point. But where the end point is and where the answers are along the way, that's something that we'll need to do, I guess, with collaboration, with regulators, with governments, with the department, other TAFEs, and so on. That's just my position. Again, it's not a complete answer, but I think it's a starting point. And it is a fine line between compliance and AI. So
I think you probably sat in the hot seat, you guys. Highest risk. I think there's lots of areas of extremely low risk that can be explored for this stuff first. I think we came here because it's a longer conversation, but we need to start it. I think that was the idea of this session, but there are some really low risk places in the technology that you use where you can start to look at this in terms of like service interactions, things like that. So I don't think you have to eat the elephant right now, but I think you guys have to start your journey now. I think that's the advice. And I think also maybe Vanessa made the point that the private sector is moving fast in terms of like the edtech companies, and there's lots out there, and actually just self-interest involved in this, full disclosure, but I think that there's a lot to be learned from those at the coalface actually building with the technology. And I think that you can actually go and talk to those maybe vendors or technology companies that are doing that stuff without necessarily expecting that, like, we're not expecting people to buy, but I think you can engage with them and actually figure out what's happening, so you get a really good line of sight when you're ready to know what's there and know what might be of real value to you guys. So that's one of the things I'd sort of call.
I think we need to start bringing expertise in as well. We need to bring the right people into organisations that can advise on it as well.
Yeah, I think we advise like boards and executives, Marion, like we do that as a service. Again, we're just a bit more advanced in the journey on this stuff. Sorry, Linda.
Thank you all for your answer to a difficult and large question, but I think you're right. I think this conversation is one of the first steps, and we do need to get moving on this, otherwise we risk being left behind. There was another question from Ross Rayburn, Chris, and this one I think is to you. You mentioned the Future Skills Organisation, which is the Jobs and Skills Council for finance, technology and the business sectors. Do you have any views on the role of the FSO in aiding alignment and exploration behind priority use cases for AI in VET, given their role in technology, finance and business?
Lyndall, I feel like it was a little bit of a stitch up from my friend Ross, but no, look, I think like the conversation last week with FSO was really like, how do we increase pace? How do we do things faster? I think everyone's fully aware it takes too long to stand up products and services in vocational education, and how do we like streamline that? How do we potentially take what might not necessarily require a full qual and spin out products and services that are a bit more aligned to industry? There's things like that. And when you're trying to build, say, a certificate 3 in ICT, and you need to incorporate the latest developments in AI, the current lead times to develop those products are just not acceptable. So these are things that we need to focus on. We need to move faster in those spaces. And I think the shortfall or the requirement is for over 1 million workers in that space. So, we have a really large role to play. And, it's not a higher education thing. It's actually a vocational education thing. It's a tertiary education thing. So those are the sorts of things I think that for us at the FSO, I think that's something that we're going to lean into. And I think that question that was raised by Margot about how do we teach teachers to teach this is one of the biggest priorities that I think we could face. Sidesteps the AI question, but I think like they're the priorities for me.
I think someone also commented, how do we get the teachers to teach? But it's like, could the teachers learn at the same time as the students, because it's all happening so fast? So yeah.
Like getting closer to industry. I think like there was a lot of conversation about like the TAFE industry partnerships. These are really successful models out there globally that this stuff works on. So yeah, all those things are on the table, I'd say.
So we are getting close to time. We didn't actually have a look at our poll results from earlier on. So I wonder if you want to have we have
apologies to everyone because I forgot to prompt for that.
That's all right. 100% participated. So, Chris, do you want to can you see those?
I feel like that distribution is what I would have expected. I'm actually encouraged to think that there are more people in that third, that enthusiast tranche. I just think that, like I wasn't expecting people to be innovators or visionaries. I sort of maybe expected more an observer and fewer enthusiasts. That's really encouraging to me. Feels like, the experience that we heard from with Pete and Marion, which, these are guys who feel like it's important. So they've gone out and started that exploration. And to me, that's really encouraging.
Great. So just to close off today's session, I wanted to say a really big thank you to Chris from ReadyTech, Maren from Melbourne Polytechnic and Peter from Chisholm for their really insightful and practical discussion today. And thanks also to the audience for your participation. I hope you found this session as interesting as I did.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Lyndall. Thanks,
everyone, and goodbye for now.